Hello everybody, my name is Cleric, bringing us yet another video, and in today's video, I'm going to be doing a tier. Now, you might have seen this, James and I did do basically like this. I found actually a slightly better one, as it does have, believe these are actually the pictures from D&D Beyond, and has all of the classes, including Artificer and Blood Hunter, these two right here, and they're in alphabetical order. So I will be making a tier list on what I believe, or in my opinion, these are just not ranking the best classes, these are ranking my favorite classes, ranging from, some of them will, of course, I'll have a lot more, a bit more personal towards them, such as, I've played a lot of fighters, I've played a good bit of Warlock, I've played a lot of Paladins, not too much experience playing Blood Hunter, not a lot of experience playing Druid, but I will give my opinion on them, and these are the overall classes. So I'm not going to be looking at like saying, oh well, the bard is better than the sorcerer compared to because the bard's subclasses are better than sorcerer subclasses. This is just saying the bard is better because bard abilities are better than sorcerer abilities. I'm not saying that that's going to be what's going to be like bard is here and bard up here and sorcerer because like no. I'll try to give to the best of my ability. I will try to give like kind of a proper reasons as to why I'm putting everything into certain areas. Some of it will be like you might think that I'm putting the Barbarian somewhat low or I'm putting something a bit lower than it should be. That's just because I don't have as much experience playing that class. That's not saying that they're worse, it's just saying that I don't play them as much and I don't view them as highly just because of my personal gameplay. So, the reason why I'm doing this isn't just because I did a tier list with Jamie. I actually had planned out that Saturdays I was going to start doing something with D&D. I just didn't know exactly what yet. But then when we started doing the FNAF tier list at the start of the stream, that's when I knew that this is I would probably try to do something with a D&D tier list. And then at the end of the stream, we ended up doing a D&D tier list, which, you know, it was kind of us trying to certain things in certain areas. So now this is just going to be me putting everything into an area. If you go to, this will be on. I mean, if you go to Tier Maker and you look up D&D 5e classes, or I would say look up Dungeons and Dragons 5e classes, because that's actually what I found. Is how I found this one. I think the title of this one is I think the classes of Dungeons and Dragons is what this one is titled, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, the classes of Dungeons and Dragons tier list. So you look that one up, and you should be able to find this. So you'll be able to see all of them. When you click on them, it doesn't like tell you what they are. I know what they are because of how much I played a good bit of D&D, so I know. So I will be going over everything. So Saturdays would try to be something to do with D&D, whether that be probably for a little bit. There'll be kind of like a good bit of Saturdays. They'll kind of be interspersed. Saturday and Sundays will kind of be D&D content stuff with kind of some tier lists, me explaining some stuff with D&D. So for a bit there'll be kind of tier lists, starting off with overall classes, and then I'll probably jump into specific classes themselves. Looking at ranking the Artificer, ranking Barbarian sub, which I know that this has been going on for a while, and like there's different variations to how to rank them. So I will also be putting, my take on it because I've been playing this for 5 or so years now, maybe a little bit more. So I have a lot of experience playing this game. And this is kind of coming out now just because I've started DMing a game and I've started playing a lot more instead of just making characters and playing from time to time. I've started trying to do weekly things, and I would play and I DM and I do a lot more. So I want to give a bit more of an intake and a bit more of my knowledge with this, because that's what I like. I want my channel to try to be is stuff that I know a lot about, stuff I'm passionate about. So a lot of anime content, a lot of currently is Pokemon because of how I love Pokemon. So I want to do that. I really love Stardew Valley, so I'm playing a lot of that. I really love D&D, so I want to start doing stuff with D&D. So, right off the bat, if I just want to give the general overhaul of, one of the most, probably something that a lot of people are gonna argue with is the tiers, because it's always like, no, how dare you put that class right there? It was so much better. And it's like, yeah, well, guess what? I don't play Druid, okay? I'm sorry, I'm not a fan of Druid. I'm not too big a fan of spellcasters overall. I don't play a lot of like full spellcaster. Like I've played a good bit of Warlock and Paladin who are half casters. So I do know spells and I know enough about D&D from stuff that I can play spellcasters. I just choose not to because I just like playing martial classes a bit more because I like getting up close and personal and getting to roll my d20 for attacks as many times as possible instead of once per turn. So, but we're gonna start. Now, the Artificer, I'll also kind of explain some, like explaining why I'm putting stuff there. I'll also kind of explain a bit of the class as best as I can. I don't have every single small detail of every class memorized. So I'll kind of give a general knowledge of what I can remember off the top of my head. So I won't be able to tell you that, at level, at level, 6, the Artificer gets this ability, and at level 9, the Blood Hunter. No, to be honest, I'm gonna tell you right now, I've never played a Blood Hunter. I know a lot about the Blood Hunter and kind of how the Blood Hunter functions, but I've never played a Blood Hunter, so I can't really give like too big of an opinion because I don't want to say that they're really bad because they hurt themselves, but they're really good because of the extra damage. But like, I don't know because I've never played one in practice, and I don't think I've ever like properly had one in a campaign I've been in, so I can't really say too much of my opinion on them without it just being uh, just reading because in theory it can be really good. In theory it can be really bad. So I can't give too much of my opinion. Basically, the Blood Hunter functions by they can damage themselves to gain certain abilities. So they can get like a bit of extra damage from like I think they can make it to where their weapon does fire, ice, or radiant damage, I believe. By taking damage, they can activate it, and then they get some similar thing to like how the Warlock has like their little omen, not omen things. They're like their I can't think of what it's called, but basically they can get some like special little abilities because they don't get as many spells, but they can get abilities by like once a day you can use with ill omen once a day you can use hex for free, or mask of many faces lets you use it as much disguise self as much as you want. Blood Hunter kind of has that where they can damage themselves to get certain abilities, so they're a very interesting class. It's just I don't know how good they'll be, you know so but we'll start with Artificer. Now, Artificer is a half-cast class. Half-caster meaning that they can get to level 5 spells, and they get them a lot slower compared to, the Bard, the Cleric, the Druid, Wizard, Sorcerer, all them who are full casters. They'll just, they'll constantly be getting a whole bunch of spells. They have a lot of spell slots. They'll get, every 2 levels, they'll get a new tier of spells. So it's like level 1, level 2, and then level 3 you get second level spells. Level 5 you get third level, and so on and so on. You'll be getting, better spells. Artificer, certain some subclasses of fighter. I believe I think Psionic Knight and Eldritch Knight are half casters. I actually don't know if the Psionic Knight is, but the Eldritch Knight I believe it is. Barbarian might. I don't know if the Storm Herald or whatever it is a is half caster, or if they just get like 1 or 2 spell abilities. Paladin, Ranger, and Warlock, and Arcane Trickster for the Rogue. They're all half casters, so they slowly get some spells, limited spell slots, and they also can only get to level 5. Artificer's in that same way. Artificer's main score is Intelligence, similar to the Wizard, so that is their spellcasting modifier. Also, they have the nifty ability, as you can see as a gear. That's because they're like an engineer style thing, to where they can create magical items at certain levels. They'll gain abilities to keep creating Artificer infusions. This will allow them to kind of create items that have similar effects to magical items, so they can actually make a sword have +1 to it, or a +2 sword, meaning that you, like, if you don't know I'll explain like the +1, +2, everything in another video, but They can make a lot of things, and they can also imitate magic item, which basically that thing, that infusion is instead of saying like, oh, I make this sword it be a +1 sword, it is saying that they imitate an actual magical item. Like I believe they can imitate a bag of holding, but they can only like they can have, I believe, like 10 infusions by the end of their leveling stuff, but they cannot have all of them active at once. They have a limited amount that can be active at a time, and it has something to do with their intelligence modifier plus something else, but I don't remember off the top of my head. So they're a very strong class. Their subclasses are one of them is an artillerist, which can create like a little mini cannon type thing, which is really effective. One of them can create a metal construct that can travel around with them, kind of similar to the Beastmaster, but it's a robot, which is kind of cool. Um, and they also have the Alchemist, which is just kind of creating potions that have different effects to give different boosts. And some of the potions, I believe, have a boost, but also give a negative, just as like a counteraction type of thing. A very strong class. I have played one Artificer in my time. There is a very interesting class, depending on which way you go with it and how your party is structured. Having a high intelligence is always one of the better things, and then you'll either be a strength or a dex based. I would definitely recommend dex solely for the fact that you get to have your AC will be a bit protected. Off the top of my head, I don't remember if they get armor naturally. I believe they do, which is very good. So you can have dex for a bit more defense and a bit more attack when you're not spellcasting. So all in all, I put them personally at B just because of how well they can do if you structure. I'm not saying structure the party around them, but if you structure yourself around the party, they're very helpful if you're making the proper infusions and giving them to. If you're not like, oh, all the infusions are for me. You're okay. I'll give giving a barbarian. Like if you imitate a barbarian, like something for the barbarian to give him a bit more defense, or you imitate something for the ranger, like I think you can imitate the bracers of archery. So you give that to your ranger, and they'll be very happy. Or to your fighter if they're being range, or the rogue if they're being an archery range based. They're gonna be very happy with you giving something to the monk so they can increase their defense even more. It's gonna be incredible. The barbarian. Now, barbarian, a little bit biased just because of how much I've played barbarian. As you know, I love martial classes, so barbarian, fighter, monk, paladin, rogue, they all have a lot more, like the melee based ones. They'll have a lot more experience. Like I'll have a lot more experience with them, so they'll be, probably a bit more biased for some of them than something like cleric or druid, which I don't play quite as often. But barbarian is your typical meat shield. A lot of the times when somebody plays a barbarian, they'll, tank their intelligence so they can increase their strength and their constitution. They have one of the unique abilities, similar to the monk, to where they can, while unarmored, they can add their not just dex, but they can also add their constitution modifier to their defense. Monk gets to add their wisdom and dex to their AC, which basically means that your important stats, strength, because they can do a lot of damage, so you need a lot of strength because they're a strength-based class. Constitution, which you already want to be naturally high because it gives you extra HP. And then Dex, because then that also gives you a bit of extra AC. It also lets you have a higher initiative. So a lot of times you'll see those ones being their highest stats, so they can attack first by having a higher initiative. They can attack sooner than other people, and they can also move themselves into the battlefield so they can help meat shield because of their main function of rage, which allows them to half damage depending on what type, like what barbarian you go for. But barbarians will always, I believe always, have bludgeoning, slashing, and piercing damage while raging. It'll literally just half it. So they're very strong, and some of them, like the totem, the bear totem barbarian subclass, you literally get a half all damage other than psychic damage. So they're a very strong class. They also can hit very hard. They get a couple of abilities that let them hit harder. Get mindless rage, which basically means while raging, they cannot be affected by the charm or fear condition. which is super strong because charm and fear are somewhat prevalent in D&D, especially in later into the game. So it's like a really good thing for them to have that. The main issue though is barbarians a lot of the times will be very focused on combat because, if you're going to be a very strength and constitution based with like some dex based character, usually that means that other things have to take a little bit of a downfall for you to have all those extra points to be spending in those. Well, they're not going to really need a high intelligence because they really don't have anything to do with intelligence. Wisdom is helpful, but you don't need a lot of wisdom because wisdom saving throws is usually stuff to control you. Well, after a while, you get mindless rage. I believe all of them get mindless rage. Uh, that just means that you don't have. Actually, I think Path of Berserker is the one who gets mindless rage. I think everyone gets persistent rage, but you get like the ability. I mean, getting controlled, but that's like the main thing. So if you are playing a Berserker, then you kind of don't have to worry about that. And I think there's some others that also can help resist that. So, like, there's not too much. And then Charisma, there's not a lot of Charisma saving throws that are needed. So usually you want it, like, those ones will always be a bit lower than your physical abilities, which kind of makes you really good in combat, but kind of bad elsewhere, which can actually, come to some really good role-playing aspects. But, you know, when a lot of the times you might be a little bit too stupid, so you do some bad decisions because of how you roll the dice. But, you know, that's of course, not dependent on the class itself. That's just dependent on, do you roll well? Do you, you know, how are you going to play it? It's how big is role playing at your table? A lot of actual dependence of the campaign, of how you play the character, all that kind of stuff. Me personally, I love the Barbarian. It's not my favorite class, but it is something that I love to do. If you're looking for a tank, the meat shield, you throw in a Barbarian, he starts raging, doesn't take anywhere near as much damage as other classes do, and it's ballpark, dog. You are really up there for him. The Bard. This is, the meme of them all, Bard Cassidus, right? They are a charisma-based caster. They are just straight up out here, getting things like 3 proficiencies and 3 musical tool proficiencies as well. They can do it all. They are a jack of all trades, as their second level ability says. They can do so much somewhat well. They don't have one thing that they do better. They aren't going to hit as hard as some of the other spellcasters. They won't be able to tank as well as some of the, non-heavy armor wearing characters like the monk or the rogue. They're not going to be able to hit as hard with like physical attacks that they might do if you're picking like sword, the College of Swords and College of Valor, I believe, let you do some physical combat. They're not quite as good as, pure ones like Fighter, the Monk, or the Paladin, which are like very, physical based. But they do everything. Like that's the whole shtick is that they're charisma. So you dump into that persuasion, that deception, that performance. So you distract people. You get people to think that you're like better than you actually are. You think that people will want to be your friend. That is the Bard right there. They are the fast talking, smooth talking, wheeling, dealing, best in the game. That's kind of what they do. Jack of all trades is a really nifty ability which allows them to have anything that they are not proficient in, they can get half proficiency bonus, which is huge. Because then, if you're having like a negative in something, like maybe you have a negative in strength because you don't need to be using strength as a bard because you're a spellcaster, well, that means your dex actually takes a toll from that. Well, now, or your athletics check takes a toll from that. Well, now you got to add half your proficiency, which by end of the game, you're getting a +6 to proficiency bonus usually, which means that you got to add a +3 to anything you're not trained in. And that also means that your other things that you are trained in get a +6, but they also get the nifty ability, which the rogue also gets, known as expertise, which allows them to add their proficiency modifier twice, which means that if you're trying to persuade somebody and you have a +12 to that stat plus a +5 from your charisma, if not more, that's a 17. You're rolling anything. And some of the subclasses, I believe it's might also be Valor or Eloquence, I don't remember off the top of my head, it actually makes it to where when they're making, I think, any charisma thing, they just straight up cannot roll lower than a 10. It's so good, because then you can just talk to somebody, you lie to them, oh, I rolled a natural 1, psych, it's a 10. And it's all of a sudden a 27. Like, it's insane just how good the bard can actually be. If you make some good spell choices, you can be the healer, you can be damage dealing. They have the magic secrets ability, which allows them to take from spells from any class. They can choose spells that clerics get. They can select spells that only druids get, only warlocks get, I believe. Like, they can actually get them all. They are a master of none, jack of all trades character. It makes them so powerful, and definitely makes them S tier, because as long as you're not really being like just a terrible bard, like you're going like a 16 charisma, 20 like strength bard for some odd reason, you're gonna do excellent as a bard. Next up is the Cleric. Cleric has always been seen as the healer, which makes sense because they naturally get a lot of healing stuff, and they also get the ability, like one of their domains is the domain of light, domain of healing. They have abilities that let them heal even better. They're also a wisdom-based character, a wisdom-based spellcaster, which wisdom can help with your medicine checks, which can help you, stabilize people, help you heal them with a medical kit, help them. It just kind of really is a very beneficial thing. They are a very good class to choose. There's almost never a reason not to choose one. If you need a healer, if you need somebody who can deal high damage, if you are going to run a campaign, and, if you're in a campaign and you know that there's going to be undead, Cleric is probably the best thing you could choose other than the Paladin because of how strong they are with radiant abilities, with necrotic abilities, their healing, their AoE, their protection and buffing and debuffing stuff. Clerics are an amazing thing, and depending on which domain you go with, you could potentially become, you can kind of become like a more spell focused, less physical focused version of the Paladin by getting to wear like medium or even heavy armor, and you also can get proficiency with certain martial weapons, so you can go in there and hit kind of hard. And you also get some nifty abilities known as your domain, your divination stuff, which is basically, for some of them, grant really cool abilities. Like, I believe one of them, I think the domain of war or whatever it is, allows you to, if there is somebody, if an ally within you misses an attack, I believe it's within 30 feet of you, you can give a plus 10 to the attack, which a lot of times can make something hit. Because if you roll a 14 and it doesn't hit, well, all of a sudden it's a 24 because you add plus 10 to it from the Cleric. Really strong. Eyes of the Grave. You see somebody who goes down, you can instantaneously stabilize them, or you can just straight up negate a crit. That is arguably one of the strongest abilities in the game, is to just straight up negate crits. If an enemy walks up and hits one of your allies and it's a natural 20, well, guess what? It still hits, but now it's not doubling the damage because the crit no longer happens. It's so powerful, and their spells can be so varied and so strong. I haven't played too much of Cleric, but they are certainly one of the best classes you can do. Now, I'm sure that a lot of the times, like, a lot of these are going to be a bit higher compared to a bit lower, but once I get into the actual subclasses, that's when things will be putting down, because this is just like the personal bias. But when I get into the subclasses, it's comparing them to the rest of the subclasses. This is kind of like, you can't really compare the bard to the barbarian. You can't compare the barbarian to the fighter, because the roles can be completely different. Yes, they're both tanks and they're both physical-based characters, but they're also just so different in play. Because you can do, wearing your full heavy armor, getting an AC of like 24 at some levels, so you can just block everything, and Combat Master versus Rage, and Path of the Berserker, so you can Frenzy for more attacks. There's, very similar, yes, but very different, and you also sometimes want intelligence or want charisma for this, and sometimes you want charisma, and sometimes you can't compare the classes to each other in that. It's just how good can the class be, and how good do I find them to be, which is why some people might put the Artificer at the top because of how well you can do and how well you can use infusions. the Cleric at the top just because you personally like the Cleric more, because you've played a lot of Clerics. Maybe you're a really big fan of the Druid, who is also a wisdom-based spellcaster, but while yes, also being able to heal, has a couple of other really strong abilities. Less of the radiant damage that the Cleric has with their wisdom, and more of nature stuff. They can have a lot of element-based things, meaning things that do fire damage, ice damage, lightning damage, a lot of those cool things. They also, depending on which ones you can do, you can shapeshift, meaning you literally, with, I believe, the wild shape ability, as a bonus action, you can just become, like, animals, you can become elementals, you can summon animals, like conjure fae, conjure animal. You can also conjure elemental to gain more allies on the battlefield, and you play as them essentially, so you can choose what they do, what they attack, where to defend. Druid is a very strong class. I haven't played too much, so I can't say that they are the same ranking as Cleric, the same ranking as Bard, but they certainly are not a bad class to choose if you're definitely going to be something that's, maybe like more nature-based areas, if you need things that are more, dependent on things to do with wisdom, having this. If you're going to have something to do with elements, Druid is someone who is very helpful, which is kind of why, I'm going to say that just because I have played, you know, going with Artificer only once, maybe twice, I don't remember off the top of my head, I think I've only played one, but I've played a little bit more Druid, and I've played with Druids, a very strong class who has just a bit more, just because Artificer just hasn't been out as long as the Druid has, and Druid is one of the, like, really old school classes that have had a lot of changes, a lot of, eyes on it, so a lot of people know stuff about the Druid, even if you haven't really played the Druid. You've probably played with the Druid, and you've seen some of the really cool things that they can do with their wild shape, and with conjuring, and with any other miscellaneous thing that their subclasses can do, which I'll get more in depth in on another video. But next up is Fighter. Now, Fighter, super biased for because of how much I've played Fighter more than any other class. Because, yes, a lot of people say that Fighter is super boring, it's super basic, oh, I have sword, oh, I have shield, oh, I hit thing, like, yeah, well, so is Barbarian, but Barbarian is like a lot of people's favorites, and there's a lot more unique stuff that the fighter can do compared to the barbarian, because you can be a two-handed fighter, you can be a one-handed fighter, a dual-wielding fighter, a sword and shield fighter, an archery fighter. You can take the Battle Master subclass, which allows you to command people on the battlefield, giving you special abilities, which I'll get more into when I talk about the fighter subclass stuff, but they can basically kind of command people around, get extra D8s for stuff, get extra movement, get extra hits. As a martial class, they gain the ability to get extra attacks. So the champion, I believe, allows you to crit on a 19, then crit on an 18, I believe at the end crit on a 17. Which means that if you roll a 17 to 20, you crit. Which is just insane that 4 numbers allow you to crit. And it also gives you the ability to kind of really morph your play if you want to be heavy armor with a lot of defense. You just basically don't take any damage because nobody can ever hit you. You can do that. You also, I believe as the fighter, you also gain a lot more feat and feat or score boosts because the fighter doesn't get quite as much stuff that the other classes get. But they also just straight up can get more feats, which can balance out, because then if you want your physical based, your sword and shield high AC, well, now you can't really hit people from a distance. Well, you can use one of the feat options that you get to take spells. You can become, you get one of those. If you play a variant human fighter who immediately takes the Sentinel feat, and then you have, you take the Sentinel or you take the Polearm Master feat, and then you get like a glaive or something. So you hit people, and they only have to stay 10 feet away, and you get to use your bonus action as an attack. Fighter is, in my opinion, the best class in the game because of how much variation you can do. This Bard also has a lot of variation, but it's always gonna have to be spell based, other than like the School of Sword and School of Valor. But to be honest, those aren't really good, and that kind of takes away from what the Bard is. But Fighter just is so variant, and of course it's personal biased. So you might think that that Fighter is the absolute worst class in the game. I'm very biased for the Fighter, so this is my opinion. So yeah, and you can play a Dex or a Strength-based fighter, depending on which type of build you want to do. They're very strong, and I like them a lot. Next up, you have the Monk, also a Dex or Strength-based. Usually, a lot of people will focus towards Dex because it can add to their AC along with their wisdom, which is why they get the ability known as unarmored defense. They also get unarmored attack, similar to how the Barbarian gets unarmored defense with the Constitution. They get it with wisdom, increasing with their AC with Dex and Constitution as long as they're not wearing any armor or wearing a shield, which is not the same as the Barbarian who gets to use a shield. The Monk does not. But guess what? They also get to punch stuff. Using their fist at a certain level, they become magical weapons, meaning that you can punch a ghost, and anything that says that they resist damage by non-magical, their fists are considered magic, which means you get to punch them without having to have that damage reduced by any amount, because these hands are rated E for everyone. And you also gain abilities that allow your movement speed to be increased, which means that you can be running around the battlefield at Mach 1 by the end, especially if you're playing like a Tabaxi, who have the ability to double their movement speed on a turn. So you guys can actually be running Mach speed at some point. You also get the ability, kind of like a secondary ability known as Ki, which is something that's to do with your wisdom. Now this is a very powerful thing, and it kind of gives you a couple of abilities, something like a defensive stance, which means that any attack targeting you is now a disadvantage for spending a key point. You get to use Flurry of Blows, probably the thing that the Monk is most known for, which basically says that if you hit somebody on your turn, you can then spend a key point to get 2 additional attacks on them. You also, after hitting somebody with your hands or with a monk weapon, as long as you have a free hand, as a bonus action, you can just hit him again with an unarmored attack. Which also means that unarmed attack, after a while, the die actually goes up from a D4 to I think a D6 and maybe even a D8 by the end. I can't remember. But they're very strong. They also gain the ability, they also have a stunning strike, which you hit them. If the enemy fails the Constitution saving throw against your Monk DC, they're stunned for a round, which means that your allies get advantage on attacks, which is huge, because if you hit them, you stun on the first one, well, you just keep on punching. You hit them again, you hit them with Flurry of Blows, they get extra attack, which means that they can attack more often in a turn, and it also isn't limited to 1 key point a turn. If you want to use all your key points on 1 turn, I don't know if you can, but you basically can just start spending them. You also get Deflect Missile, which means any single target attack towards you that is ranged, you can potentially reduce the damage if it does hit you. You can actually get it to the point where the attack actually just straight up doesn't hit you at all. And if you're good enough, you can actually catch it and throw the weapon back, which is really cool. Monk does a lot of dope shit, and in my opinion, they're a little bit better than the Cleric, but me being, my big boy units, I personally like the Barbarian just a little bit more. But the subclasses for the Monk can add a lot of really cool stuff, which we'll get into another time. Paladin, once again, very biased for the Paladin, as it is, again, one of my favorite classes. Wearing a heavy set of armor, coming in with the holy might of your chosen oath, your devotion. What are you devoted to? There's so many good things, and same with the Cleric, you get a couple of extra abilities, your little divination things, which some of them you also can give you you and your I think just you actually, straight up just advantage on an enemy with a vow of vengeance, saying, hey, you're dead, mate, and then you get advantage on them. You also get an aura, depending on which oath you chose. You get an aura that is starting at 10 foot radius, which basically any ally within that gains a benefit depending on which subclass you chose, and at a higher level, the range increases to 30 feet, which means that everyone basically will be getting your benefits, as your team will usually stick together somewhat, or you can stay back with your squish your allies to protect them while you sling a couple of distance spells, run in and hit them with your big old weapon, as you can once again be wearing heavy armor for the higher defense, having a two-handed weapon, or having a sword and shield, which is just as viable. You're going to be spellcasting to hit them from a distance, being able to block and not take a lot of damage, healing with the ability of Lay on Hands, which is separate from spells. You can literally just have a pool of, like a resource pool that you can just be healing with. You can also cure disease and poison with it. You also become immune to certain things as a paladin. They're just a very powerful race, which I'll get way more in depth on when I do stuff with their subclass. So personally for me, they are the number 3 subclass because of how powerful they actually can be. Next up is the Ranger. Before I forget, there are a strength, maybe dex based, but you usually will probably be a strength and charisma is your spellcasting modifier. So you'll be a strength and charisma based character as the paladin. And for the Ranger, more likely than not, you're probably going to want to go with Dex because that is your main attack. Because a lot of times Rangers like to be, well, at a range as they get proficiencies with the bow and arrow. And you also want to be Wisdom as that is your spellcasting ability modifier. You are a half-caster, so you only get to level 5. Same with the Paladin and the Artificer. You only get 5 5th level spells with a little bit less, but you make up for some other cool things, like getting to attack more in a turn. Certain subclasses, like the Beastmaster, just letting you have a ally on the battlefield, which can be an animal, which is just dope. You can be running around with like a wolf, which also means that potentially, I'm not going to say that this is a necessity, but, you can get some, abilities that maybe like a rogue, having your, if you multi-class into rogue, you can actually have your animal right there harrying the foe, which counts as an ally for you, giving you sneak attack and advantage. The ranger probably gets a couple of other things to do with all the extra little little things here and there. They get a couple of stuff that really help with their stealth. They have a very druidic style feel to them, as they are also kind of a nature type of class, just not heavily as focused as druid is, a bit more on the actual wanting to attack with range based things. But you can also play a physical combatant if you're going to be a ranger. You don't have to be just at a distance, but they're just really cool. And I've only played one ranger, but I actually did manage to survive as her. I was a ranger rogue, so it wasn't a full ranger, so I can't tell you how good a pure ranger is late game. But they're still very powerful, especially with extra attack, which is always super helpful. Personally, come on, there we go. They're a little bit better. They're better than the druid, just solely because my bias towards martial classes, and definitely a lot better than the artificer, which so far, I'll tell you now, Artificer probably is, in my opinion, is the lowest on the totem pole, but definitely not a terrible class. As you can see, B is its ranking, which there's just 3 straight up that are not being filled in. Next up, a lot of people, it's the edgelord of the group. High dex, high intelligence, depending on what subclass you do, you might want charisma, you might want wisdom, but a lot of times you want that high dex for the damage that you do and for your AC, and you also want that high intelligence so you can investigate and find traps. Main purpose of the rogue really is the fact that they'll be running around, sneaking, being the stealthy boy who gets in, picks the lock, grabs steals whatever they need to steal, and they're out without ever being noticed, as they're extremely stealthy, being that they can get expertise as part of their function, which, if you remember, doubles proficiency in anything that they chose, which is really cool. No, when I say expertise in anything they chose, I'm not saying that once you get expertise, everything you're proficient in is doubled. You get to choose something you're proficient in. Like if you're proficient in stealth, acrobatics, and one other thing, you can choose 2 of those to become expertise, and the other one will still just be normal proficiency. But that's alright, because it might be normal proficiency and only getting a normal amount of proficiency modifier bonus. At level 11, if I'm not mistaken, you get the ability where basically anything that you're proficient in cannot be rolled lower than a 10. And they get a lot of things that they can be proficient in, as I believe they get 6 right off the bat that they can choose from. So if you also are going to be playing something that, if you potentially get more things that you're trained in, because you're choosing other things from your race, and also because if you're choosing a feat that allows you to get even more stuff to be trained in, you basically get to be running around doing as many ability checks as you want and just never failing them, because you always get a plus 10. And of course, with that dex, you also gain a really cool ability called Evasive, which basically means that anytime that there's a dex save throw, you cannot critically fail, as everything is bumped up by 1 tier. If you roll a critical fail, it's a failure. A failure is a save, and a save is a critical save. Also, if you save on an AoE based dex, you just don't take damage, and if you get a normal save, like you failed but you get save, well, that just counts as half damage, which is super strong. So, a lot of really interesting, powerful things, but of course, I've been kind of grazing over the fact of the rogue's main ability, which is sneak attack, which basically, once per turn on a hit, you get to add a couple of d6. Now, what allows you to get sneak attack? Do you have advantage on the attack? Yes. Is there an ally who is harrying the foe? Do you get sneak attack? Yes. If the enemy doesn't know you're there, do you get sneak attack? Yes. Basically, as long as you don't have disadvantage, you get sneak attack. Like, that's one of the big things, is work with your team. Don't be the lone wolf the entire time. Try to get advantage. You'll be getting sneak attack constantly, which allows you to do a lot of damage, especially later on when you just get to keep adding d6s after d6s. So you get a once per turn, you have your d4 for your dagger or something, maybe a d6 for your sword or something, and then you just grab a handful of like 10 d6s and throw them on the table, and all you hear is as a bunch of d6s are rolling, and you gotta tell your DM, hey, I hit like a truck this one time, yes, but guess what? I hit like a truck regardless. I personally love the bard just a little bit more for the like all the stuff that the bard can do, but rogue always has a soft spot in my heart, being the first class I ever played. Next up is just a very fun-loving Sorcerer. Sorcerer is a very unique class. They are innately born with magical abilities, making them a charisma-based spellcaster. Very unique, having the only thing in the game called meta magic, which basically means that you get a couple of sorcerer points that you can do a couple of special things with. Basically, these allow you to manipulate your spells in special ways, like allowing for the duration to be extended. That's cool. Twin spell, meaning that if you cast something that's only supposed to target one enemy, you get to target more. You get to target 2 people, as if you cast the spell twice. Very strong. You get to do something like subtle spell, which means that you get to just straight up take away the verbal and somatic components. So if you're trying to cast suggestion or friends and you don't want the enemy to see that you're doing it while you're trying to make the persuasion with them, because you have a high charisma, being a charisma-based spellcaster, you can real quick just subtly do it by spending a little bit of sorcery points, and boom, it works. And now you get advantage on that persuasion check, which you easily make being charisma-based. You also can do a lot of other things like Empowering Spell or Quicken Spell, which allows you to cast 2 spells in a turn. Which, note, you don't get to do really. There's not a lot of things that let you do 2 spells in a turn, but you can actually make something into an actual spell into a bonus action spell, and then you can cast something else, which still can only be a cantrip. As the rules state, you can cast as long as if you cast a level spell, then your bonus action has to be a cantrip or lower. So, still won't be able to cast like 2 fireballs in a turn, but you can do a couple of other really cool things because of how it works. Not to mention that their subclasses add a lot of very interesting abilities. So, depending on how you want to play your sorcerer, you can build them to be blaster, you can build them to be buffing, you can build them to be debuff sorcerer. Very, very strong, and certainly one of my favorite spellcasters to play, other than the bard, of course, because, well, I think anybody who's really played a bard, a couple, like 1 or 2 bards, yeah, bards have a lot going for them. Next up, very near and dear to my heart, it's the demonic people. Most of the time, it's the Warlock. You sign a pact selling your soul, essentially, to just get magic. You get magic. Get a lot of really cool things, a lot of benefits from becoming a warlock. You just, quite simply, are a bit better. A lot of the times, everybody always plays with like, oh, I sold my soul to a demon and now I get the abilities. But like, you don't actually have to be selling them to a demon. Doesn't always have to be it. Doesn't have to be the case. You don't have to have a negative impact with your pact boon. You can actually get something like really cool where like your best friends or you're a tiefling and you made the pact with your dad. So it's like, yeah, thanks dad for this. So now you're getting powers. A lot of cool things, especially the fact that depending on who you choose to get your abilities from. Archfey, Pact of the Hexblade, you can get the Pact with a Djinn, all these different miscellaneous things, which I'll go over when I'm actually talking about the Warlock more in depth. A lot of really cool things. One of my favorites, of course, being the Hexblade, when you pick Pact of the Blade, and your subclass is the Hexblade, which basically allows you to just create a weapon in your hand, which you're linked with, which you can then add your Charisma modifier to attack with. Instead of using Dex or Strength, you can use Charisma, which is why they're actually a really good fit to be subclassed with, to be multiclassed with either Sorcerer or the Paladin, because then you get to use your naturally high Charisma to start hitting people. It's really cool. Plus, not to mention that if you're going to go a few levels in Warlock, you get to start wearing armor if you chose it first. Then you go into Sorcerer, so you get a whole bunch of extra spells from them. But you get to wear armor, and you get to hit people with a sword if they get too close. So you can basically hit somebody with your sword, use Quicken spell to then cast a spell as a bonus action, because it's strong, as long as your DM allows it. And then, of course, they also get a lot of other things, like their pact spells, which are spells that they always have, which they could like add to their actual thing, which is different from the domain spells that these two get, which is basically they always have them ready. It does not mean that your pact spells are not always prepared like it is for these two. It just means that they're added to the spell list that you can choose from. Common misconception, but get more into that another time, or you can watch other people like the Dungeon Dudes. They explain it a bit better. But overall, Warlock being a very biased towards, I've got to put my demonic boy here just above my holy boy. But of course, you do see where a bit of my bias lies in the fact that I love the whole, hitting people with a little bit of spells. Very personal up here. And last but certainly not least, and probably the most variation out of any class, is the wizard, which you might think, how is there a lot of variation with the wizard? They're a spellcaster, they don't do too much. That's where you're wrong, idiot. No, I'm kidding, you're not an idiot, maybe. Unless you're playing a barbarian, then you're probably an idiot, because a lot of times you choose a very low intelligence, but that's okay. But the wizard, having any of the schools of magic to choose from, evocation, abjuration, conjuration, divination, all these different things which all give your own special little benefits, like divination, which gives you one of the most overpowered abilities in the game, which at the start of every day you get to roll 2 d20s. Whatever number it rolls on, keep those die, because later on in the game, during that day, whenever you or an enemy or an ally makes a roll, you can straight up just say, no, you get to use this number instead. So if you really want to make sure that attack that you're about to do hits hard, and you just rolled a natural 20 on the day, you can just say, hey, look, I rolled a natural 20 during the first start of the day. That means that this attack is now a natural 20 no matter what happens. You also can say, hey, that's really cool that you rolled a 23 as your saving throw, except now you got to add a plus. Actually, you rolled a 2, so add your modifiers, no longer adding up to 23. Sorry there, bad guy, you get it. Very powerful, and a lot of other special little abilities that I'll explain when I go over all the wizard, which will take a while because there's a lot of wizard stuff to go over. The main gripe against the wizard is just kind of the fact that they don't quite actually have as much spell stuff as other classes, which you basically get to choose like almost a lot of spells for everybody else, as they kind of get them as prepared spells. The wizard has to put them into a book, but they also can just get if you ever get a scroll, they can just put it into their book, and it does cost money and resources and time, but if it is of the school that they're from, so if you get an illusion spell and you're a school of illusion, it's cheaper and a bit faster and easier to do by putting it in compared to trying to put an evocation as a school of illusion. But they also get a lot of special abilities and a lot of very strong spellcasting things. They also can just fill their spellbook up really high, and they can get a lot of other really cool abilities. To be honest, the main gripe about the wizard is actually their HP and the fact that they don't get armor. Like, they can get hit really easily, and they can get hit kind of hard, and they also don't usually have a lot of HP. So that is an issue. But hey, just stay protected. Maybe polymorph yourself if you think you're about to get into a bit more of a physical combat. Throw up a polymorph on yourself. put on mage armor, take the shield spell, so you can add AC to yourself as a reaction. And then, you're set. You'll be really protected, plus counterspell. Counterspell. Very powerful. But yeah, this is my classes. This is what I believe. This is my class tier. As you can see, I didn't put anything in C. Yeah, I could probably, say drop a couple of these down into C, but I personally don't think that any of these are just god awful. Like, I would never say like never play. That's kind of what these two really mean to me, is like you should never play them because they're just so detrimental and you can't play them. Like, no, these are all really good classes. Like, you could make a case for me. Like, I could make a case of Artificer going to C. I don't know where I'd rank Blood Hunter just because I don't have too much experience playing Blood Hunter. But honestly, every class is really good in where they're needed. If you need stuff with radiant damage, if you want to play stuff to do with, if you want to play Warlock, if you want to be the very stealthy jack of all trades, if you want to be, nature based, if you want to be, range based with an animal, do you want to be the tank, whatever you want to play, there's an option. And if you want to play a rogue, but you also want to be spellcasting, well, there's a rogue spellcasting subclass called the Arcane Trickster. Like, every subclass can also add to the actual class themselves, which is kind of why class in general cannot be really bad. Like, you can't say the Artificer is bad, because the Artificer kit is really good, especially with its infusions. It's just, what infusions do you choose, make it better or worse, and also what subclass do you choose really put stuff at the top, which is why I love the fighter so much. Also, it's just biased because of how much I've played some of these classes. Like, I've played more fighter than anything else. I haven't played a lot of Artificer, no Blood Hunter. And this is just my opinion. Yours might differ. I know James's does, because Jamie believes the monk to be a god. And I'm like, no. They're alright. They're good, don't get me wrong. They're just not the best. Sorry, not sorry. But hey, if you guys disagree, then make your own list. I mean, I'm on Twitter, I'm on Instagram. Just look up my name. You'll know it's mine because you'll see my little logo, that nice little drawing. Except Twitter, it is still the same appearance. It just might be drawn a little bit different. Compliments to Jamie for her amazing artistic abilities. But you can go ahead and just tweet me at me and say, hey, this is my list. This is why you're wrong. And I'll tell you, cool. And then that'll be it. No, but I'll if you actually do disagree with it, then, make your own list and let me see it and explain why you put some stuff in different areas. Because, everybody has their own opinion. Of course, mine has a bit more biased stuff towards it. Maybe you've played a ton of Artificer, so you can see why Artificer can be S tier. Hey, that's all you. But whatever you liked, then you say it. That's an opinion. And it's yours. Just know that this is mine. So don't yell at me in the comments. Don't say I'm an idiot. Jamie, I see you typing. Unless you're not, because you probably don't watch my videos, which is alright. I watch yours. Also, fun fact with Jamie, if you go on to Patreon, you can find her and donate $5 a month as a subscription. It's pretty cool. Support Jamie. Support me too by liking the video and commenting down below what you enjoyed about it, and disliking the video if you didn't like it and commenting down below what you didn't like. If you really want to support me and know when I upload, then the best way to know is by subscribing. But that does it for this video. Bye guys.